My name's Martin. I was already standing at the edge and considering leaving my marriage, long before everything finally fell apart. For a while, I had been living in a marriage that felt more like a slow fade than a shared life. But I knew it was time to go during the family barbecue, where I was laughed at. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, I disappeared. My wife, Julie, and I were married for just over 8 years. In the beginning, we were like most couples, but deeply connected. We had plans. We didn't just want a house, we wanted a home. That was the dream we signed up for. And for a while, we chased it together. But somewhere around year 5, things started to shift. It wasn't sudden, and that's what made it harder to notice. The turning point came when we started trying for kids. We wanted them badly, both of us. But when months turned to years with no success, we turned to fertility clinics. Appointments, injections, tests, and schedules. We tried everything they told us to try. Every month was a new hope, and every month ended with a silent disappointment that filled the room like smoke. I saw what it did to Julie. She became quieter and withdrawn. At first, I thought it was just stress. We were both hurting. But somewhere along the line, she stopped trying altogether. Not just with the treatments, but with me. She gave up on the dream. I think when it became too painful to hold on to, she just let it go completely. And with that, it felt like she let go of our marriage too. The affection that once came easily faded. And in its place was this cold, polite distance. We still lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, ate at the same table. But it felt like I was living with a stranger, and the silence between us grew heavier every day. What hurt the most was that she didn't seem to notice or care. She had shut down emotionally. I told myself that love meant holding on, even when the other person let go. So, about a year and some months before everything finally broke down between me and Julie, her sister showed up at our door. She had just gone through a nasty split with her husband. I'm talking full-blown shouting matches, cheating allegations, and even police being called to their house a few times. It was a mess, and understandably, she needed a break. Julie came to me, asking if her sister could crash with us for a few days, just until she figured things out. Of course, I said yes. It was the decent thing to do. She had 2 little kids who didn't ask for any of this. So, they came in with a few bags and what looked like an overnight plan. But a few days quickly started to stretch. I figured maybe she needed a couple of extra days to sort out her next move. But then those days became a couple of weeks. She didn't talk about finding a job or getting her own place, or even going back to the town she left. Her stuff started taking over our guest room. The kids' toys were everywhere, living room, kitchen, even our bedroom at times. Their clothes were mixed in with our laundry. Still, I kept quiet. But then a couple of weeks turned into a month. Then 2. Then, before I knew it, we were deep into the 3rd month, and she was still in the house. I had an entire other family living under my roof, and no one seemed to think it was a problem, except me. My wife's sister was loud and sarcastic, always had something slick to say, and the kids were full-on chaos. There was no discipline, no respect for space, no sense of control. It was like living inside a daycare run by a drunk circus clown. Every single day was filled with tension. I'd come home from work exhausted, hoping for just a little peace, only to be met with some new mess. Arguments started becoming the norm. There was no conversation anymore, just conflict. And what hurt the most? Julie always took her sister's side. Always. No matter how badly her sister acted, Julie would find a way to defend her. I'd bring up concerns calmly, and she'd shoot me down. She made excuses like, she's my only sister, or you can't expect me to throw her out just because they did one thing you don't like. To my wife, Julie, my frustration wasn't valid. There was this one time that stuck with me. Her sister was mocking and throwing digs at me. Instead of shutting it down, Julie chimed in with a smirk and said, "Oh, stop, he's sensitive." Then they both laughed. I felt humiliated. It got to a point where I wasn't even sleeping in my own bed. Julie would let her sister and the kids sleep in our bedroom, and I was left to find space wherever I could. Now, I know some people might hear all this and think, why didn't you just leave? And trust me, I asked myself that too. But it wasn't that simple. See, I believed that a big part of what Julie was going through was the pain from us not being able to have kids. It crushed her. And I thought if we could get through that and find a way forward together, then the love we once had could come back. So I stayed longer than I should have, believing that our marriage still had a chance. But deep down, I was starting to realize I was getting tired. One day, I had reached that point where love alone wasn't enough to keep me rooted in a house where I felt like a stranger. So I booked a quiet consultation with a divorce lawyer, told the lawyer the facts. Weeks after that meeting, the divorce papers were drafted and ready. But I couldn't bring myself to serve them. Not because I thought she'd change, but because some part of me still wanted her to look at me the way she used to, even if just once more. Still, as I waited, the tension didn't reduce. I made a mental to-do list and started checking things off one at a time. The first thing I did was quietly pack some of my essentials, clothes, documents, sentimental items, and stored them in old moving boxes. I labeled them vaguely, just in case anyone found them. After that, I rented a small storage unit outside of town. Paid in cash. It was the kind of place no one would ever think to look. I started slowly moving the boxes there, a few at a time. I opened a new bank account in a different name variation. I bought a new phone. I even picked out a new city. Somewhere smaller, quieter. All of this, I planned it down to the hour. If my marriage were to end, I was ready to vanish like a ghost. But I didn't pull the trigger. Because, despite everything, I still loved her. Somewhere deep inside me, under all that hurt and exhaustion, I was still holding on to the woman I married. One Saturday, I went out to clear my head for a few hours. When I pulled back into my driveway, there were more cars than usual lining the street. Laughter echoed from the backyard. I could hear kids yelling and running around before I even opened the front door. I stepped inside and followed the sounds. The backyard was alive. Kids were darting around with juice boxes in hand. Someone was flipping burgers at the grill. The music was low but steady, and everyone looked like they were deep in conversation or cracking jokes. There were drinks on the patio table, paper plates stacked high with food, the whole 9 yards. It was a full-blown family barbecue. The only problem? I didn't know a damn thing about it. I paused at the door, just taking it all in for a second. It was like walking into someone else's party in your own house. I kept my expression neutral. I spotted my wife, Julie, laughing with her parents near the patio table. Before I could say anything, one of Julie's aunts noticed me and waved me over. "Martin, come grab this for me real quick," she called. I nodded and made my way across the yard. I've never had any issues with the extended family. Honestly, I always got along better with some of them than with Julie herself these days. So I forced a smile and went to help. As I handed over the tray she needed, another relative leaned in with a curious smile and asked, "Hey, where have you been all day? We've been here for hours. Didn't you know we were coming?" And just like that, it clicked. I was excluded. I barely opened my mouth to respond when my sister-in-law cut through the chatter, her voice loud enough, saying, "You know, if Martin disappeared tomorrow, I don't think anyone would even notice." Everyone burst out laughing. And to top it off, her sister added, "I didn't even know you weren't around." It was meant to be a joke, sure, but not to me. So I raised my hot dog like it was a glass of wine, gave a half smile, and said, "Challenge accepted." Nobody said anything after that. A few people glanced at me, probably thinking I was joking too. But I wasn't. That was the moment I made the decision. I was done being invisible in my own life. By the time the barbecue finally died down and most of the guests had left, the house was still buzzing faintly. This was the night. I was already thinking of leaving the marriage, and with what was said to me today, I wasn't going to wait for things to get worse. I didn't need much. Just the basics, a couple of clothes, my laptop, important documents, and cash in a duffel bag. Before walking out the door, I left a copy of the signed divorce papers right in the middle of the kitchen counter, where she'd have to see it in the morning, with a yellow sticky note placed neatly on top. It said, "You noticed yet?" Then I walked out, locked the door behind me, got into my car, and drove off. That same night, I deleted every social media account tied to my name: Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Gone. Then I pulled out my old prepaid phone, swapped out the SIM card, and tossed the original one into a storm drain at a gas station 2 towns over. I didn't want to be found, not by her, not by anyone. I just couldn't keep hurting myself by staying. I drove to a small cabin I had seen earlier that was listed on an obscure classified site, owned by a retired guy who didn't ask too many questions. I paid 3 months up front in cash. It was deep enough in the woods to feel like the world had forgotten about it, but close enough to a town that I could grab groceries when I needed. I made a living doing small freelance gigs online. It paid just enough to cover food, electricity, and the few basic needs I allowed myself. The days bled into each other. There was no schedule and no pressure. I'd wake up to the sound of birds. Weeks turned into months. My beard grew out. I started eating better, sleeping deeper, and thinking clearly. Not once did I check on Julie, because I finally realized I didn't need to. That chapter was closed, and no good ever comes from reopening a wound just to see if it still bleeds. 8 months since I left, I got the idea to check one of my old email accounts, checking for some personal file I backed up years ago. It was one I hadn't logged into since before I left. I wasn't expecting anything. The moment I opened the inbox, I froze. There were dozens of emails, all from Julie. At first, I didn't know what to think. Part of me didn't want to read them. I hovered over the delete button more than once. But eventually I clicked. The earliest ones were furious. She was demanding to know where I went. She called me selfish, a coward, and heartless. Said I was abandoning her, that I had no right to just vanish. She swore she'd find me and drag me to court. Her words were sharp. But as I moved through the emails chronologically, the tone changed. Her words started softening. There were still questions, but they weren't filled with rage anymore. They were unsure, hesitant, like she was beginning to hear her own voice in the silence I left behind. The most recent ones hit me differently. I remember staring at one in particular. She said the bank had started sending warnings, something about missed payments. That foreclosure might be coming. She admitted she was now working 2 jobs, trying to keep the house afloat. Said she had to send her sister and the kids away. They weren't helping, she wrote. Like she finally saw what I had been trying to explain for years. In one message, she said, "I get it now. I understand why you were so distant. I just wish I hadn't been so blind." Another one read, "I wish you'd come home. Not because I need help, but because I miss you. Because I finally understand what you gave up trying to hold everything together." Then came the one that took the wind out of me. She wrote, "I was stupid. I took you for granted. I thought you'd always be around, no matter how much I ignored you. I still haven't signed the divorce papers. I keep hoping one day you'll walk through the door." I sat there, staring at that screen. I won't lie to you, I felt something. My chest ached reading those words. I knew that side of her. The side that could love deeply. The side that wanted to build something with me once. And maybe this was that version of her finally pushing through the noise. But feelings aren't enough sometimes. For years, I stayed in that house, convincing myself that love would fix things, that time would heal. But now, even reading those emails, as emotional as they were, I didn't know if I could ever step back into that life. At this point, it had been exactly a year since I vanished. A full year of living off the grid, cutting ties, and breathing freely for the first time in a long time. I only went into town once every couple of weeks for supplies. That day, I stopped by this little coffee shop I'd come to like. It was tucked away on the edge of the city. I walked in, ordered my usual, and was waiting at the pickup counter when I heard someone say my name. At first, I ignored it. But the second time it came, firmer, more surprised, I turned. It was Ryan, an old mutual friend. His eyes widened like he'd just seen a ghost, which I guess in a way he had. We exchanged awkward small talk. I kept it brief, didn't give much away. Less than a week later, there was a knock at my cabin door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I peeked through the curtain. And there she was, Julie. For a moment, I didn't move. I opened the door slowly, keeping my expression flat. "What do you want?" I asked. She didn't speak, as she just broke down, sobbing. She kept saying she was sorry. That she didn't know it had gotten that bad. That she wished she'd listened more and understood sooner. I didn't interrupt. I let her speak. When she finished, I stepped outside with her, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, "I'll come back, but only to end this the right way. I'll sign what needs signing. We'll wrap this up like adults. But I can't be your husband again. Not after everything. Not after what your sister put me through. Not after you stood by and let it happen." She didn't argue. There was no fight left in her. Just a slow nod. She wiped her face, tried to smile, but couldn't. And with that, she left. Having reflected on everything, it's strange how people only begin to see the value of something or someone when it's already gone. That's one of the hardest lessons life teaches you. And sadly, it's a lesson I had to give and also live through. For years, I stayed in a marriage that was clearly falling apart. But what nobody tells you is that love can't survive when one person is trying and the other has emotionally checked out. I endured the constant disrespect, the belittling, the chaos that came with my sister-in-law and her kids because I loved Julie. I became invisible in my own home. But the crazy thing is, it all only started making sense to her after I vanished. That's when she realized what I had been trying to say all along. And maybe that's what some people need, the absence of what they always assumed would stay. So if you're watching this and you're in a situation where you feel like your presence is being taken for granted, I hope my story gives you something to think about. Don't wait until you're broken just to prove that you were whole. And if you're someone who's been pushing someone away, ask yourself why it takes their absence for you to finally see their worth. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on all this. Drop a comment. Share your own experience if you've been through something similar, or even if you haven't, tell me what you think. And if you know someone who might need to hear this kind of story today, please share it with them. You never know who's sitting quietly with their bags already packed, just waiting for one more reason to disappear. Thanks for being here.